I was going to say, if you'd get the hamster out of your ass and back into the computer, we wouldn't have this problem.
Yep.
I'd already pushed record. Thanks, Chad. That's a great way to.
That's a good intro.
It's my pleasure to introduce the great David J Schow. Did I say it correctly?
You absolutely did. It's a hard CH like school.
Yeah, but you were adopted, right, in Germany?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I've been doing.
I did all this. I did all this in mix interview. I am a German orphan, adopted by American parents who were living in Middlesex at that time, and it was somewhat of a weird fashion. My dad spent his 23rd birthday in a German prison camp after having been shot down in 1940. He was a tail gunner on a B-24.
Yeah.
Which is funny because then years later, you know, Mick's father-in-law was also a B-24 guy, and they did the movie Unbroken about him, Louis Zamperini. And he got shot down. He was Pacific Theater, though, and my dad was European Theater. And it was a weird fashion with people who had been vets of the Second World War in the 50s. Yes, I am that old. To adopt German orphans. My dad actually made 3 trips to Germany and almost adopted twin girls on one trip. And then he got there, and then it's like it had been cherry picked, and I was the only thing that was left, and I won. So,
well, no. Now, which Mick are you? It's Mick Garris's. That's Cynthia's dad. Is that
yes,
who you're talking about?
Cynthia's dad is Louis Zamperini, who is the main character of the movie Unbroken.
Right. Yeah.
That
I didn't know that was his daughter. No, I did not know that was. I did not know that.
Louis' daughter is Cynthia. Cynthia is Mick's wife, and there you go.
Yeah. Well, Mick was great enough to do our show. You actually, before we're going to talk about a story, and I had all my questions up earlier, but one of the most fascinating things about you, to me, other than your great work, is you have pretty much made a living as a writer most of your life.
Let me tell you something. Joe. I have only made a living as a writer.
That's
for my life.
James and I were talking about that. My friend James is down here, and I guess we already introduced ourselves, but it's the damnedest thing. And I don't know how you do it now because it's probably never been harder, right?
No, I like to refer to the pandemic actually as writer's paradise because it is just, I got so much done in 2020. I really did. Yeah. And I have had 3 legitimate jobs in my life, and I've been fired from all 3. 2 of them do not count because they are writing related. One of them was working in a bookstore.
Yeah.
And you all know what that means. That means half the stock comes home with me.
Yeah.
Fired. The other was working for 6 months on the staff of a magazine in Chicago while I was trying to sort of get a foothold and get credits and stuff. So I don't count either of those. And the third job, actually, I should say the third job was being a phone solicitor for a day and a half. And that was such a soul-destroying enterprise. I needed that $25 really bad, and I turned my back on it at that time. And there was a period early on where I decided, look, either somebody's going to pay me for writing something or I'm going to die. And somebody had the bad taste to actually give me money for something that I was written. And it was a local newspaper in Tucson, Arizona. I sold an article to the Arizona Daily Star, not realizing, it's like I wrote an article about how grotesque it was for people in the desert to be suntanning all the time. And they get that horrible reptile beef jerky, flesh. What I did not realize is that when the newspaper bought the article and they bought it for their weekend section of their paper, I had my byline in color, and I said, I've just written an article about how insane people must be to suntan in the desert, thereby giving the Arizona Daily Star an excuse to run 4 pages of women at the University of Arizona in bikinis. Victory. From that point, I was doomed. It's like I began sending them more stuff. Pay me more,
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. I was writing book reviews for Film Comment magazine.
Well,
I was writing film reviews for other magazines. I was doing movie. I'm like the opposite of David J Schow, my evil twin,
you talked
because
about
he
him on
started off
Next
writing
Week.
science fiction novels, and then he found, yeah, and then he struck his form of gold with nonfiction, and I started off writing movie reviews and articles in nonfiction, and transitioned into fiction.
Yeah.
So we were the opposite. We thought that if we met, if we actually shook hands, the universe would end. You know,
Really quick.
If you meet your doppelganger, that's it.
But really quick, I want to show you something. I knocked it down getting this computer ready. I told you, and you were telling me a story that you lived in Lexington. We'll get to that in a second. But I met you many years ago at a convention in Louisville, Kentucky. It was, and I had to
Wonderfest.
Wonderfest, yes.
And I was looking through this book, and you wrote such nice words to me. Joe, you wrote the same thing John Carpenter did. Go fuck yourself, Joe.
Yeah, okay.
No, I'm joking. You didn't write that.
No, but I know John did.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Well, I have a story I can tell you after this because this is about you. Everyone probably who's lucky enough to have lived needs a John Carpenter story. That and a Harlan Ellison story. We have one of those too. And we know that you knew Harlan, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Uh-oh. Those eyes go up. You probably have some really good ones.
I'm looking at my girl who just poked her head in the room here.
Oh, well, hello.
No, please go ahead. Yeah.
That's how I discovered you, was raving and drooling, and Fango.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't probably put 2 and 2 together with Freddy's Nightmares. And of course, I am 42, but I promised you I wasn't going to ask you about a certain movie in an email earlier.
Boy, you don't look that old, so it's like I envy you. You can ask me about, first of all, you can ask me about any movie you want. Second of all, you do know that I have brought raving and drooling back to life.
No, because I haven't got yes, a little, but no, I haven't. Is it going to be in the new Fango?
No. They never asked me, and in fact, it's like I think that the new Fango people think I'm dead.
Well, I haven't got any of the new ones, so
Your Fango's a Vagoda.
Are you guys all on Facebook?
Yeah.
I follow you on Facebook.
Because you know what they say, Facebook is for your parents. So we are our parents at this point.
Well, the 3 of us are parents. So
yeah.
David, I literally passed some kids yesterday, and I started grumbling about the music they were listening to. So yeah, I'm officially.
You never thought you'd become that guy, right,
no.
Chad?
Never. And I'm like,
I never thought I'd become the "that's not music, that's just noise" guy. Yeah. But you know what? It is noise.
When the words, "I wish they would turn that shit down," came out of my mouth, I just bowed my head and sighed and just kept walking.
And I have the capacity to withstand high decibel, nasty music better than anybody. What I hate is but man, they start that auto tuning shit, and it's just like, I'm gonna melt. It's just, and that's. But you know what, guys? That's every generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what Plato used to say, where he said, "Youth is loud and the world goes on."
I'm sure at the time people were complaining about Peter Frampton and his guitar.
Well, I read a book called "I Hate New Music," which you guys would really enjoy, written by Dave Thompson. Look it up. You can get a copy for cheap, and it's all about how he has pinpointed the day the music died, which was the day that Frampton Comes Alive was released.
We have a friend Kevin's met Frampton. You guys heard this? I'm not going to tell that story on here, but yeah, we have a friend who met him drunk.
So which one? Which one was drunk?
Kevin. He's legally blind. He's literally a blind drunk. So
was he legally drunk? Yeah. Okay.
Oh yes, he's been legally lots of things. Well, illegally.
Now, I hasten to point out this is nothing against Peter Frampton, because Peter Frampton used to be in Humble Pie, and Humble Pie recorded the single greatest live album in the history of live albums.
Do you want me to break out into 30 Days in the Hole? Keep going.
And I saw him in concert. Robin Trower opened for him. How's that for an inversion?
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm mystified by your life. So you wrote for Fango. You've written books.
Joe hates Peter. When it comes to music, only Joe wants to talk about is 30 hold on loosely.
That's not true.
No, you have.
That's all
you
Jones
have
is
to
talking
know
about.
this. You have to know this. You have to know the discography of Frampton's Camel from one end to the other.
No, but I
How
also
old are
know,
we? How old are we? Come on.
we're pretty old, but and I'm hoping you're going to have a better time than you thought you would. But I do want to get back to some questions. What's
Sure.
it like? So you also write comics now, right? You're writing for. And you're not a
Unbelievably.
comic guy, but you got into comics.
No, I am the most not a comic guy in history. And
Because I'm not a comic guy. Of the other two boneheads here, James and Chad, are the comic guys. I'm always been the movie. Well, we're all movie guys.
You could stump me on the history of comics, superheroes. The Marvel stuff leaves me ice cold. It's like, no, get it out of my carpet. You know,
I'm still trying to figure out WandaVision. So how did Sandy get you to do that? Sandy King.
Well, she didn't. The guys who got me to do it, if you know comics at all, you know who Tim Bradstreet is.
Mm-hmm.
These guys will.
Tim's a friend of mine, and Tim is now the record holder for having done more book covers for me, more book jackets for me than any other individual artist. And Dwayne Swarzinski, who is a hard-boiled writer who has written comics out the wazoo, Dwayne told me he has written 175 individual comics in his career. So the two tallest guys in the room, right, bullied me into going and meeting with Sandy. And I knew Sandy and John from way back. I mean, like in the late 80s, and we'd fallen out of touch.
Well, in my head, you guys just hang out. Everyone in Hollywood who ever worked in a horror film just hangs out.
Nope.
And you guys come over to each other's house and have drinks, because literally most of our guests have been, these assholes in Kentucky. Yeah, they're rednecks, but they don't suck too bad. You can do their show.
But you ask good questions.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
You ask good questions, so why not
expand
our reach and our grasp?
I was going to say,
what I mean?
Having a brief time in Kentucky, putting that thought of everybody from Hollywood, Joe made me think of you waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning, going and meeting John Carpenter at McDonald's and drinking coffee.
Sorry, don't worry about it. John would not be up at 5. He would be, he'd probably still be up playing video games at 5, smoking pot, right?
Pretty much. I mean, he's got a lair on the lower floor of his house. And this is getting to the end of the story before the beginning of the story.
I know. Go back to your beginning. I'm so sorry.
One of the greatest things about doing comics with Storm King is doing the annual, because John is the guy who says, we have to leave the house. John is the guy who says, do I have to put shoes on? And so one of the few things that he would come out of the house to do is an annual signing for Storm King at Golden Apple Comics in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So much so that when we do Tales for Halloween Night, we do cover variants strictly for Golden Apple.
Oh.
Because they've been so supportive and everything. But after that, every year except for last year because of COVID, after the Golden Apple signing, we all go to John's house and eat. And a sublime definition of paradise is going to John's house and sitting there and watching Westerns with him.
Yeah, I bet.
While you eat. And watching him identify every character actor in the Westerns. And the other thing he does is he watches Lakers games. And if you watch Zooms with John, you'll see him like a Zoom setup like this with the screen. And he's always going like this. Because he's watching a Lakers game while he's doing the Zoom, which is the thing that he really wants to be doing.
So if we ever get lucky and have John Carpenter on a show, I am not allowed to mention that I'm a Boston Celtics fan. Thank you for that tip.
Yeah. You may be taking your life in your hands.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I've met him a couple of times. Oddly enough, this is neither here nor there. I actually had Sandy. She said she'd do the show, and then she turned me over to her publicist, and then that's where it ended. About a week.
She turned you over to Liz?
Yeah.
Keep hammering her.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I actually was going to go back to Sandy again, going, listen, I got stopped here. I'm not going to ask you John Carpenter questions. I'm actually going to ask you about the Long Riders. I'm actually going to ask you about producing. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, she hated working on the Long Riders.
Oh, maybe. Okay. Well,
well, now we know why,
giving
Dad.
me that advice, though.
Ask her about Ghosts of Mars. Yeah, it's like, okay.
Okay. Well, anyway.
Just don't step on a landmine there, Joe. You know, it's like, okay.
Well, yeah, it's hard to know, right? Because
it's amazing and it's fascinating because her credits are everywhere
mm-hmm.
in the movie industry. You know, before anybody knew she was Mrs. John.
Yes, that's the thing is I wonder if she gets a lot of requests just because that people are trying because he's such a recluse, you know, and not doing stuff. If they think,
well, it's also every time we've done New York Comic Con, we've done San Diego Comic Con. Everybody, the Storm King booth is an impressive booth.
Yeah.
At conventions, we have sofas, we have catering. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous. And but everybody that comes up to the booth wants to know, is John here? What's John going to do?
Yeah.
What would John say? You know, it's like that kind of thing. So yeah, that might get a little maddening after a while. And she's got plenty of accomplishments on her own that she can talk to you about. I mean, all of Storm King is her doing.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. There is no doubt in my head that those comics, that everything that happens isn't her pushing it and not him. So I have a quick question, but because I know Chad had to get up, but he's got a question when he comes back about Mr. Block, Robert Block. But I've got a question. What food are you having at John Carpenter's? As a fat man, I've got to know, what are you eating at John Carpenter's?
Oh, I got
deli sandwiches, chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah. I was going to guess.
It's not diet conscious stuff there.
No, I didn't think so.
Deli sandwiches?
No, John loves cookies. And so when my girl actually baked cookies for John, I mean, we're golden, you know, at that point.
Yeah.
But once upon a time, you know, because Dwayne was working in comics, Tim was working in comics. Tim is very famous for working in comics, and they said, you should talk to Sandy. And it allowed me to reconnect with her after not seeing her for like a decade. And it was so ridiculous because it was like, hey, you want to write a comic? I said, I don't know. And she goes, do it. And Dwayne was visiting me from Philadelphia. He was staying in my guest room. And I said, I'm going to attempt a comic because years before they wanted me to write the Leatherface comic when that movie came out, Chainsaw 3.
Yeah.
And I attempted to do it and I failed miserably at comic writing. And my pal, Mort Castle took it over and saved it because here's my name on the cover of these things and I had nothing to do with them, you know, really.
Yeah.
So I really felt like it just wasn't my idiom and I'd gotten burned and it was no good. But after talking to Sandy, I said, how about, and we started with the Tales for a Halloween Night, which is, let's face it, folks, it's a horror anthology. Yes. It's an annual horror anthology. How can you go wrong? And I just adapted stories of mine to comic book form. And I've been in every issue since the first one. We just turned in number 7. And so that's annual. And she goes, well, why don't you do a series for us? And I began to realize, just to make the answer short enough, I began to realize this is like directing your own little movie.
Yeah.
These are the shots, these are the angles, these are the panels, and I am deeply involved with the artists. We do 400 or 500 emails on every issue. What does this guy look like? Which way is his head turned? What is the emotional attitude of this? And it is like directing a little movie, and it's been nothing but fun. We did a 5-issue series called The Standoff, which was about a UFO full of nasty aliens crashing into a maximum security prison. And I just turned in the last issue of the new series that will debut in April from Storm King, which was, we kept trying to shorten the title and shorten the title and shorten the title. So finally, now it's just called John Carpenter's Hell.
I love the fact he's just selling his name. He's just whoring out his name. I don't blame him.
He signs the comics.
I know. I get it, and he's and it's not like he doesn't go on every show and say the same damn thing. I have found, especially when he's talking about remakes, I have found all I have to do is sit on the couch and they reach me a check and I do nothing. It's the greatest thing on earth.
Because John is like, look at it this way, Joe. It's like John's been asked every one of these questions 4,000 times.
Right.
I want to be the guy that asks John a question he's never been asked before, and it was like, because you read some interviews with him up now. He can't avoid it because he's a rock star, now.
Right? Yeah. No, he has a whole other career.
Yeah, and I was fortunate enough to go to the first live show they did.
Yeah.
And it was like, you could just see the future unfolding, like right there. But John will say, I love John because he so doesn't give a shit. And he'll go, why the hell would you want to ask me about that? God, that's dumb. He goes, who cares? Let's watch the Lakers. So I love John. And he said some very kind things about me he does pay attention. And he said some very kind things about me in the summary for when we did the graphic novel all-in-one version of the Standoff. And John, of course, writes the first story that's in every issue of Tales for Halloween Night.
Yeah.
And his new album just came out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the music. And as a father, we all have children, and I was like, it has to be great having a completely different third act where you just hang out with your son and play music like a rock star on the stage.
Oh, not only that, but with Dave Davies' son, who they basically unofficially adopted because, Dave Davies' son was abandoned by his dad, who was in the Kinks. And,
right.
and the Carpenters raised him as a second son, practically.
Mm-hmm. He's talked about that.
So there's two. So the trio is very important. But you'll notice that the road band is 6 guys.
Yeah. All right. So
moving on.
Yeah, moving on. Chad, you had your question.
Oh no, I was just I know one of your big mentors was Robert Bloch, who most people would know from Psycho, but he has a long, extensive career. And I was just kind of curious. I was trying to find some background. How did you even meet up with him? How did that connection happen?
Well, I read Robert Bloch stories and anthologies from when I was tiny, and I blame Scholastic Books, basically, because when I was even before junior high school, Scholastic Books would send these catalogs around, and invariably there would be one page on the catalog that would have books with titles like 11 Great Horror Stories or 9 Stories to Unnerve Your Pants, or something. and go for the horror, because I was in the audiovisual department of the school. I was listening to Edgar Allan Poe LPs like Basil Rathbone and people like that, reading Poe stories on headphones on records. And so those anthologies, I have a 3-foot shelf of them right over there, and they're full of Lord Dunsany and Bram Stoker and H.G. Wells and Robert Bloch and Fritz Leiber and all of those people. And that was my first exposure. And then during the period that I was describing to Joe, where I was just kind of scrambling along trying to get people to pay me for stuff.
Right.
My friend Jeff Roven in New York, who not only got me a literary agent, but he began. Jeff could write a book on anything in like a week. He wound up writing books for Tom Clancy for millions of dollars. And he was working on a book called The Fantasy Almanac. He likes doing encyclopedias. He'll tell you who every different superhero was. He'll tell you who, the Encyclopedia of Monsters is every monster you've ever seen in a movie. And the Fantasy Almanac was, as its title suggests, he said, I want you to write entries for me. And it was like $12 an entry or something like that. And that included biographies on Richard Matheson, Robert Bloch, and another science fiction writer named Otis Adelbert Klein, who I'll forgive you for not having heard of ever.
James, do you know him?
Maybe if I read something, but no, that name doesn't spark anything right away.
If you look him up in the Fantasy Almanac, you'll learn everything you need to know, thanks to me. So I wrote Bob a letter and I wrote Richard Matheson a letter, and they sent me back these just the dumbest questions in the world. Where were you born, and what were your parents' names, and what year? Just the basic bio stuff. And both of them sent me back handwritten answers to everything. And I began a correspondence with Bob that lasted about a decade before the first time I met him, which was in 1982.
Wow.
And I met him at a convention, and I met him at a convention where I had to write up his blurb or his bio for the program book. And then by that point, I lived in LA. And for the next decade, I mean, it was like we would see him at conventions. We'd talk about Jack the Ripper together. We'd do dinners. We'd do breakfast. I'd go over to his house. It would just, and he was this open with a lot of people who were fans. He was a very generous guy, personally. And fortunately, I got a little more of that than even his favorite fans, would get. And it was just sort of he's an amazing force in modern horror fiction, because they talk about guys like they talk about Edgar Allan Poe having invented essentially the modern detective story, the modern science fiction story, and stuff like that. Bob was like single-handedly responsible for everything that we call psychological horror now.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, if we would not have what we have today if it wasn't for him. That's all there is to it.
And you wouldn't have the approach to it. And another thing that Bob did was he almost single-handedly wrote all of the best post-Dead of Night horror anthology movies, where they were all essentially like, issues of Tales from the Crypt or something like that. All those portmanteau movies that had 5 stories and a wraparound, those were almost all Bob.
Let me ask you a quick question as a follow-up, because I know James is going to ask you about another author. What's your favorite Richard Matheson novel?
My favorite Richard Matheson novel is it's a toss-up between Hell House and Beardless Warriors.
Okay. Mine's a toss-up between Hell House and I Am Legend.
Well, the guy...
Hell House sometimes wins. I prefer Hell House over Jackson's The Haunting. And
I put him equivalent. I have a top 3 where that comes from. There's The Haunting. Mm-hmm. There's Hell House. I love Hell House because it's like a really muscular version of The Haunting.
Yeah, because it's actual ghosts. Yeah.
The Haunting has its charms. But there's another book in that triad that I think is equally fundamentally important that knocked me out when I first read it. And that's The House Next Door by Anne River Siddons.
Well, I will be watching or reading The House Next Door because I've never read it.
Because it is a haunted house story where the house is brand new.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's about 3 phases of owners who come in and out of the house, and each of them comes to grief. And it's just a wonderful book. It's a wonderful book if you haven't read it.
I have not read it. That's another great thing about doing this show is sometimes we learn so much, and that someone turns us on to this thing or that thing that leads to another thing, and it's just a rabbit hole of geekery, and we don't let a really bad history of bad covers on the paperbacks and stuff. Don't let that put you off of the book. No, absolutely not.
Don't look at the covers at all. No.
I'll take your word on it. All right, James. Sorry, I had to get that Richard Matheson in because I was just curious.
Oh, I knew Richard Matheson too, and it's. I was going to say, not to cut James off, but I was going to say, my John Scolari, who runs Cimarron Street Books, who's doing my massive backlist reprint program as we sit here, is the world's biggest I Am Legend fan. He has, 157 different editions of the book.
Yeah.
He probably doesn't want to talk about this Will Smith adaptation.
Oh, sure. No, he'll talk about anything if it's related to I Am Legend. Are you kidding?
Oh, I always say that, if you're a Twilight Zone fan, it was, and you think, oh my God, that one episode, it was written by 3 men. It was written by one of 3 men. It was either written by Charles Beaumont, Serling, or Richard
Rich
Matheson.
Matheson.
And here's the thing: it's like I don't think writers credit Serling enough as an
I don't
influence.
think so either.
And
I
that
don't-
kills me.
Because he didn't have a bunch of books, and it was very, very important to Rod Serling to be published because his brother was published. His Robert Serling was a novelist,
Uh-huh.
and so the peculiar thing about that is that if you look at those Twilight Zone books that are the novelizations of Twilight Zone episodes and stuff, Rod wrote all that shit. He novelized his own stuff, which is really rare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I Charles Beaumont's another one that I always talk to people about. It's like he's just kind of forgotten or people don't remember because he.
Well, I'm a Beaumont fanatic. I mean, I even wrote the flap copy for one of his books.
Yeah, he died fairly young, right?
Yep, I know his son.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Chris.
That's correct. All right. Sorry, we're getting off on a tangent. James.
No, it's not only James. What have you got? What have
And
you
by
got?
the
for-
way, never apologize for cutting James off.
Yes,
We
please
do it
cut
all
me
the
off.
Hey,
time.
fuck you, James. You don't get a question. All right, I'm going to go back.
No, cut me off by all means, because I find this fascinating. Because
I need a ham sandwich.
I've
Go to
always
Carpenter's
been
and get some
a,
cookies.
I've always been a wannabe author, and I love authors, and I love documentaries about authors and things like that. But I do have to ask if you have a Harlan Ellison story or a couple Harlan Ellison stories, because that was the first author that, quite frankly, I found fascinating, and I did get to meet him eventually. But he was terrifying and engaging. And somebody introduced me to him too young, probably. I think I was in middle school when the librarian was like, "Just take this book and go away."
If you're interested, James and I will tell you this what Harlan did to us once after the show.
Well, I got nothing but Harlan stories. I am actually a contributor to Nat Segalov's bio of Harlan.
Lit Fuse, right?
Yeah.
I've got a copy. It's over there.
I told him the story of how I encountered Harlan in 1975, and I was so taken with his routine and his stage presence that I basically stole it, and that results in the person you see gesticulating before you now is Harlan's fault, and
But you're nowhere near. You're nowhere near. You're unless you're just being nice to us. You're not as cantankerous as Harlan.
But see, that's a legendary mistake. And it's like, here's the thing. The last time I saw Harlan was right before he had his stroke in 2014. We were all at the paperback show, and Richard Christian Matheson and I went over. We had to leave early, and Harlan was making his first and only appearance at the show before he got banned. And because they didn't like it because he was taking the time to talk to and sign everybody that lined up for him. And they had to give people numbers. And they closed the hall down. And he stayed outside the hall until 10 o'clock that night signing stuff for people.
Yeah.
Susan got fed up and took a cab home. You know? and it's like, Richard and I went over to just say, you know, how'd he do? We got to leave. And he's like, and he was like, you know, oh, you fucking guys, don't fucking bother me. You know, it's like that guy. So we leave. 2 days later, I get a phone call from Harlan. And he says, Susan advises me that I may have gnawed on you guys a little bit. And I'm really sorry if I did. And he was like, please come back over to the house. Don't be a stranger. You know, it's like that kind of thing. And that's the part of Harlan that people don't know, especially people who didn't know him. Mm-hmm. And who repeat the shit about how obnoxious he could be at his worst. Yeah. But I'll tell you this, guys, he was a major influence on me. Not only that, he was the major influence on this reprint program that we're doing at Cimarron Street, because the direct inspiration for that reprint program was that series of pyramid paperbacks that Harlan did in the 70s. It was like one a month for a year. And they had uniform covers. The covers were all by Leo and Diane Dillon. And he wrote these sprawling, verbose introductions for them. So by the time that they got to the book called No Doors, No Windows, the introduction was longer than most of the stories in the book. And that indeed is what's happening to us at Cimarron Street right now.
But I think that's why I love and why I gravitated toward him. The first book, and I'll never forget, I was in middle school, and the librarian, for whatever reason, I think it's because I was a Star Trek nerd. and she just wanted to get rid of me. And she was like, well, he wrote an episode of Star Trek, go away, you know. And it was approaching oblivion. And for some reason, it's the first book that I read the intro to. Because I was like, I want to read what this guy has to say. And I was relatively young.
And Approaching Oblivion is a really nihilistic collection.
Well, and it starts with the Kent State, his reflections on Kent State.
Yes.
And I was like, this guy's saying, like, I was young. I wasn't around for the full gestalt of, but I was like,
Harlan marched in Selma, Alabama, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like in the 60s. And it was like, I think that the rank and file of ordinary people like to take away from Harlan because he was associated with science fiction, but his association with science fiction was almost unilaterally devoted to the improvement of science fiction. That's why he was so angry all the time. Of course, Harlan was angry all the time anyway. It was. I'll tell you a Harlan story. Once upon a time, I have to be circumspect about certain names here. Once upon a time, there was one of those signed limited editions that we all know and love. You know what I mean? Now, this was about the period of time where the signed limited edition began to be abused by the people. Will you sign this edition? And then you get a stack of pages that's like this, you know, and you go, there's only 250 copies. Why am I signing? So Harlan was in the book, and I was in the book. Others were in the book. And Harlan calls me and he says, you know, I just had to sign these signature pages for them. I'm supposed to hand them off to you. There sure seem to be a lot of them. So I go over to Harlan's house to get the pages. We're sitting around his living room and he's like, I just did some math on what the limited edition of this costs. And you know how much the publisher is making off this for the site? I said, I know it's a crime, but it's like, frequently, if it's a single author collection, we do it to promote our own book. But this is a group of people. This is like 30, not guys, men and women, sorry.
Right.
It's like 30 writers signing this edition. And he goes, no, this isn't right. It's like, we're going to sign, if I'm going to sign 2,500 pages, I want some compensation for this. So we call the publisher up on the phone and Harlan says, I have signed these pages. Unless you pay every writer in the anthology an honorarium for signing these pages, I am putting them directly into my fireplace right now. And we listened to the publisher kind of prevaricate, you know, and it was like, okay, Harlan, okay, calm down, you know, because it's always calm Harlan down, right? And it's like, calm down. I'll tell you what, for you, I'll pay you. It was some exorbitant per page rate. It was like, I'll give you like $800, you know, to sign him, and don't do that. And he goes, but don't tell any of the other contributors that I paid you. And Harlan says, well, I've got Dave Schow is standing here, and you're on speakerphone right now. And he began calling up other contributors in the book and saying, here's what just happened. And sure enough, we each got a little check. Thanks to Harlan.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
I think that's the stories that always, like when he did Sci-Fi Buzz, the Sci-Fi Channel segment, the Sci-Fi.
He was
Buzz.
very visual. He was very visually present on the Sci-Fi Channel.
But I think one of the things that I took away from that, and it's very similar, is how many times he did segments talking about, here's an author that, you know, A.E. Voigt saying, you know, this, we can't let this pass away without, we can't let Clarence Buddington Kellen talking about Mr. Deeds and how that used to be everywhere, and how are we forgetting this? And
well, Harlan loved Van Vogt, and years later, when I bought a house in Hollywood, A.E. Van Vogt's widow was my neighbor.
Oh,
And so I could not walk the dog past her house in the neighborhood without her giving me another book. You know, she was a very sweet lady. She's still with us. And thanks to a special deal that they cut with A.E. Van Vogt and 20th Century Fox, every time that 20th Century Fox does Alien anything, Lydia gets another check for $25,000.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I used to go around sit around Lydia's living room and drink prosecco. She was trying to get me drunk, and it was like drink prosecco and eat peanut butter pretzels.
What
So
a
Joe Lansdale was visiting me one day. I said, "You got to meet Lydia Van Vogt. Come on down the street," And Joe was totally charmed. And yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize because I'm now doing that. We all hang out with each other anecdote.
Yeah.
No, but that's great. Now I just
now I know it's true.
Yeah.
Oh,
all
now
with the
we
coffees and the egg McMuffins.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now I know it's true. But I mean, that's the great part of your life. Now you have the movies, you have the books, you have the comic books, you have the magazines, and it's fantastic. And your stories are wonderful, and they'll live on past you. And that's
one hopes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, they will. They will. Especially some of them, they'll be on past you. But one of the great things about this, and one of the great things about doing this, so I do, and James and Chad, we do a lot of convention work. So we do a lot of moderating at cons, and I love it. And that's part of the things I missed. And one of the things is that all the stories that are now in your head, right? Of all the people you've got to.
This is part of that. This is part of that though, Joe, because this past year I have done more Zoom panels, readings, and interviews
because you had
than
time
ever before. And it's like, if you don't have a knack for it, if you don't have a knack for Zooming, and I think I have at least a little tiny one,
You've got it down. Got it down.
And it's like, because there's so much information to impart, this helps permanentize those stories.
Right.
That's what James says all the time. James says that a lot of what we do, go ahead, James.
Oral histories. We need these oral histories of what I call fandom. I mean, the things, and that's one of the reasons we don't do just a one subject podcast. I love the diversity that we're able to do and able to bring in, just talking about everything that contributes to what we love as fans.
And we
should be as free associative as possible for this, because we're going to talk about things. 1, 2, 3, 4 of us are going to talk about things that people never thought we would be talking about when they first tuned into this.
Yeah.
I hope.
And what another thing that we love to do, not to talk about ourselves, is that we normally it's not because we don't necessarily love talking to actors, but it's folks who are in the production, writers, production designers, directors, artists, well, not necessarily key grips, but we should probably interview some key grips. People who are actually, because you talked a little bit to Mick about this, Mick Strawn, those are the people who are actually on the set who know what the movie was being made, who have the stories. They weren't in their trailer.
Mick Strawn was on the set when I actually played Freddy Krueger.
Tell that story, please.
I am legit. Now, if you accept that, let's go all the way back to Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Go ahead.
If you accept that there were 2 guys in the creature suit, but there were other guys who wore the creature pants for the shot where he walks past the porthole. You don't need a primary actor for that.
Yep.
Who wore the sleeve with the arm when he reaches through the porthole, right?
Yeah.
Right.
By that standard, I have played Freddy Krueger because I played Freddy Krueger in the trailer to Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, which Mick was on the set for, and I'm under the baby carriage, and I have photographs of the little tinfoil helmet that I had to wear because they were just pouring KY into this thing. It was raining down on me, and my arm was about to catch fire. And I've got a Freddy glove, and I've got a sleeve, and it shoots up out of the baby carriage in the trailer, and that was my moment of glory as Freddy. And the guy who manufactured the gloves gave me one. It was a glove that had been used in Nightmare 4 with actual metal blades and blood still on it, which I have over there. I hate to confess, it's in a frame over there. But
why wouldn't it be in a frame? You worked on.
Oh wait, I'll show you. Watch this.
Go ahead. We've got time. Let's just make up things. So if you're listening right now, David has left the interview.
He's tired. He's tired of us. He doesn't want
noise. I have no idea what I'm doing.
It's all James' fault.
I don't know if you can see this or not.
Oh, we can see.
Oh, yeah.
That is amazing.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Glove that I wore in the trailer for Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5.
That's cool.
Which I also rewrote with no credit.
A thing of beauty is a joy forever.
There's two things. So, by the way, you're talking about free association. I was about to go with another question, but you just said that. Let's talk about that a little bit for our fans. We have a lot of fans out there. Well, we don't have any fans, but we have a lot of people who listen to the show who are
What do they want?
Screenwriting.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think a lot of them understand. Todd Farmer, who had written Jason 10, did a very good job, I think, on a previous episode of it.
How do I know Todd's name?
Well, he wrote Jason 10. He wrote Drive Angry. He wrote Bloody Valentine remake. They're all directed by Patrick Lussier. He's very similar to you in the fact that you're both originally or at one time lived in Kentucky. I thought I could get you on the show, and it took over 3.5 years to get you both on the show. And I got the director, and I got the directors of the movies before I got you two fuckers. Very similar. Very similar. And we both hit it off, I think.
But see, Joe, if this is my last interview, this will be kind of cool.
I agree.
If I get hit by a bus, tomorrow, it's like, hey, Dave Schow's last interview. Yeah, okay.
It should drive our numbers up at least 5 or 6.
That's right. I'll do virtually anything.
But can you talk a little bit about ghostwriting, and can you talk a little bit about getting credit? Because I don't think a lot of people understand arbitration, how much you have to work on a screenplay to actually get credit in Hollywood. Can you talk a little bit?
Well,
and maybe some of the projects that you've worked on that you didn't get credit.
Speaking of raving and drooling,
yeah,
the column, for Fangoria, which has now been reborn in a magazine called Bare Bones, which you can find out way more than you ever wanted to know if you go to Facebook and look up the links.
I'm going to.
Scroll down the links on my page. My very first column for the resurrected Raving and Drooling was exactly about writer credit.
Yeah.
And it's like, in an era where every monkey at a keyboard who presses a button that says render gets a credit, why can participating writers on movies not get any credit? And part of the reason is our wonderful Writers Guild, who wants the world to believe that only 2 or 3 people write a movie.
Right.
And it's like, so in this column, I said, now you probably all know the 6 people that are credited for, this movie, but you don't know the 17 other people who wrote on it who aren't credited. Now, why is there not, in the end of a movie, and because as you guys probably know, this is all money based.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's all residual based. It's all about mailbox money.
Yep.
Above the line credits. And a lot of people will accept a little bag of money under the table for a rewrite. And they go, no, I don't want credit. It's all right. But why is there not a system where they used to have this in the 40s, where they would have a credit that would say additional dialogue by, or something like that? Why is there not a thing at the end of the movie that says participating writers?
Yep.
And at our election, we can be on that list, or we can say, I'd rather not be on that list. One of the reasons for this is that when the Flintstones movie came out in 1994, or whatever it was, there were 35 writers on that movie.
I don't doubt it.
Go to the movie and look how many are credited. Now, it's like, go to the movie, it's like, remember the damn dirty apes line from Planet of the Apes?
Yes, sir.
Of course.
Like, everybody knows that Rod Serling worked on Planet of the Apes. People who are in the know that Michael Wilson worked on Planet of the Apes. But what they don't know is that line was written by a third guy who didn't get any credit on Planet of the Apes, whose name has now escaped me, but I mentioned it in the column. Yeah. So if I could effect any change in the Guild, I would do 2 things, which is like, get that participating writers credit in, because you take it or you don't take it. It's not royalty based. You don't get paid any money, but you can say, hey, Mom, I worked on that movie. See, look.
Yep.
Just like the guy that drives the shit wagon gets a credit.
Yep.
Of course, the guy that under current circumstances, there are so many people taking credits as producers that the guy who drives the shit wagon could technically be considered a producer.
Yeah.
So why not allow the option of just an in name only credit? Because that would change IMDb significantly. IMDb will not allow uncredited writers, but they'll allow uncredited actors.
Yeah.
They have this big phobia about credit, and it's like, I can't think of any other participant in the process other than writers that are subjected to this prejudice.
Well, it was there's a great interview with Michael Weber. He's a pretty popular screenwriter now. He wrote 500 Days of Summer and The Disaster Artist, to name a couple of films. He had this great story of how him and his writing partner were hired to write the Pink Panther 2. And they worked tirelessly to put together the script. They had this thing laid out. They gave it to Steve Martin. They worked with Steve Martin closely. They had everything planned out. They submitted it, and then the company proceeded to hire more and more writers,
which they always do. Yeah,
they always do. And they got rewrote. And Michael Weber and his writing partner are credited as the sole screenwriters. And they have all of one joke left in that movie from the original.
Oh, yeah. You're lucky if you wind up with a line of dialogue.
Yeah. And it's like, that's the writing in Hollywood. And it's always been that way. I mean, it's even from the dawn of cinema, writers have always seemed to get the shaft.
There are 5 uncredited writers on The Wizard of Oz.
Yep.
Right.
'Twas ever thus. It has always been this way. And I'll tell you, not to do the whole anecdote all over again, but New Line wanted me to write Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, but I didn't have a script. I was the only asshole in Hollywood with no script in his back pocket, so I did not get the job. So we began beating the bushes to find something where I could prove to New Line that I could write a script, and this was the time when they were producing Freddy's Nightmares, the TV show.
Yeah.
So we went out, and eventually I wrote a script for Freddy's Nightmares, the last episode of the first season. And on the day, and this was an important day, on the day that I turned in the script, within 24 hours, they hired me to write their next horror movie, which was Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3.
Yeah.
So I'm writing drafts of Leatherface. I'm now in the position of the first teleplay that I ever wrote and the first feature screenplay that I ever not only bought but produced, which is rare.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're shooting Nightmare 5, it has now gone through 4 other writers, none of whom wants to be credited for writing a mere Nightmare on Elm Street movie. They all use pseudonyms.
Yeah.
It was Les Bohm and it was Bill Wisher, and all these guys. It's like they're cool now, they're cool now about it, but like, I don't want to be associated with a Freddy movie. Oh my God, and so after all of that, they bring it back to me while they're shooting it, and they're saying, "Please help us. All the dialogue in this movie blows." And I had a guy coming to my apartment in Hollywood and literally taking pages to the set from my apartment. And the irony of this is that there is more of my dialogue in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, for which I get no credit, than there is in Leatherface, which I get for sole credit.
Your friend, well, I'm assuming he's your friend, Frank Darabont, said in an interview one time, it just makes no sense how, back to what you're saying, you can have a lifeless script, someone comes in, rewrites it, it's basically the same plot, the same bones, but it just brings it to life, and that fucker gets nothing.
Basically, yeah.
That gets nothing.
No, and it's like the reason that I would like the participating writer credit is that you could point at a list and you could see the peaks and valleys of somebody else's involvement in movie. Well, where did that guy go for 5 years? Well, he was doing uncredited rewrites on this this stuff over here,
and maybe making more money at it. Yeah. Well, we got off on a tangent on that, but
that's all right.
So let's talk about some of the directors you've worked with. I find, back to Alex, you worked with him on The Crow. We had him on the show a few weeks ago, but I didn't know that you actually did some behind the scenes production stuff on iRobot. Is that through Alex that happened?
Yeah. Not only that, but before I did the behind the scenes stuff on iRobot, I wrote 2 or 3 other movies for Alex that were never made. He asked me to do, if you watch Dark City, at some point in Dark City, you will see a theater marquee that says coming soon, Book of Dreams. Alex started making the Book of Dreams films, the shorts, which you can see on YouTube. There are 3 of them. And when he had 2 of them done, which was Reuben's Dream and I forget the first, Welcome to Crateland is the first one. And I was in Sydney rewriting a movie for him called Dial M for Monster, which was a monster comedy that we never got around to shooting. He said, do you want to write one of the dreams? Do you want to write all of the dreams? I said, no, whatever you want, because he wanted to take these short films that he did like 1 a year. And eventually, when he had enough of them, organize them into a movie that had 9 or 11 different dream sequences as a narrative. So we constructed this thing, which was about a decommissioned government dream research project, to wire it all together. In the meantime, I wrote a science fiction one, which was just a goof on every science fiction cliche imaginable in 11 minutes. And that's called Frank's Dream. And the meaningless little short that we shot in our spare time that wound up taking 10 years to finish and cost $250,000. But you can see it. You can see it on YouTube. And we never got around to the Book of Dreams movie. In the meantime, Mark Rance, who ran a production company called Three-Legged Cat, which was responsible for doing DVD supplements during the golden age of DVD.
Right.
Mark, in 2000, we assembled all the supplements for the Crow DVD, including all my behind-the-scenes footage, a number of other interviews, including me and Alex.
Mm-hmm.
And we're ready to go. And then Alex got in a war with one of the producers on The Crow, with the result that when The Crow first came out on DVD, not only were our supplements not included, but they cut us out of the EPK. They cut Alex and I out of the EPK, shortening it by 4 minutes. So it's just like every time we tried to make this material into something, it got firebombed again. So that producer said, "Hey, Alex is shooting iRobot in Vancouver. You want to go shoot behind the scenes?" I said, "Absolutely." And I was, thus began my like 8-week adventure in Vancouver, where the camera crew tried to have me deported for walking around on the set with a camera. This is a big A production for 20th Century Fox. It's a big fucking Will Smith movie, man. And so they said, "We don't want that guy shooting on our set because, Canadian rules have to favor indigenous talent working on film sets." And I said, "How about if I hire somebody who works there?" And I hired a guy who was doing video playback on the movie for 1 day. I turned around to him and I said, "Kwesi, you want to work for me for like the next 8 weeks?" And it's sure. And so now that I have a letter in my pocket, I have a legitimate Canadian union cameraman working for me. Then they didn't care if I ran around the sets with a camera. So now we have 2 cameras, and we're walkie-talkied up, and we're just like, they're shooting this over on the sound tape, and we go over there, we get long shots, we get close shots. We were all over the place, and we shot all the behind the scenes for iRobot.
Well, it was just, I was listening to that story, and it's like, so I obviously you think it's because Alex got you the job, but clearly not.
Well, no, it's actually because Mark knew I could get closer to Alex.
Oh.
Than an outside cameraman.
He would tolerate.
The first day, let me tell you, Joe, the first day I show up in Vancouver, right? I go onto the set, And the Vancouver crew, the ADs and stuff, are saying, oh, they're not going to let you shoot on the set. They're not going to let you get close to Will. Our first AD is a monster. He's a Nazi. It's like, he's not going to let you do that. Point him out to me. Okay. His first day over there, guy looks like a stuntman, cowboy stuntman from the 60s. And I walked over and I said, John Woodward, you work for my pal Frank Darabont on you were his AD. And, oh, yeah. So within 5 minutes, John Woodward is going, here, if you come over here, you can get closer to the actors when they're shooting, so it was perfect. It was perfect. John was the only guy, he was the first AD on iRobot. And John was the only guy who understood my Fire Sign Theater jokes.
Yeah.
So we bonded like that, man. It's like it was great. And he would say, no, if you want to come over here, this is a better angle because there's not booms in the way and stuff. And it was like, and it was fun watching Will work, and it was fun watching Alex work. And I ran into another buddy of mine the first day that I was in Vancouver. I walk around the corner and I nearly collide with John Woo.
Really?
Yeah, who is up there shooting Paycheck at the same time.
Okay, so that explains why you have The Killer posters behind you.
Well, John, he signed that one. It's like right there. But John remembered me from, I met John at a screening of I was the world's biggest John Woo fan.
Yeah.
And I met him at a screening of Hardboiled at Universal Studios. And so we walk out, it's the Alfred Hitchcock screening room at Universal. And we walk out of and it's like, I take these cigarettes out of my pocket. John takes his cigarettes out. He smokes Marlboros. He smokes Marlboro Lights. And I walk over to John Woo and I light his cigarette with a Zippo. Close the Zippo and I put it back in my pocket and I say, now, this lighter will stop a bullet from killing me. And then later, when I die in a hail of gunfire, my best friend will give you this lighter. And he laughed. He thought that was really good. And it was like, that was my John Woo cigarette moment. So he remembered me when I saw him in Vancouver. It was so weird, because John Woo, he's got to meet like 1,000 people, at a movie or something. And he remembered me from the Hitchcock theater. And he's such a cool guy. It's like, I got this close to writing a movie for him once.
Which was it? What was it?
It was a movie that he had written the first script of called Kato. Kato, not related to the Green Hornet.
Okay.
It was just, and it was right in the vein of, it was in the vein of Hardboiled, and we just didn't get a chance. We had a couple of meetings with Alex Ho and John, and it's just they couldn't get it was one of those times where they couldn't get the funding for the movie in America.
Yeah.
I almost wrote a John Woo movie.
Almost. Is that is that one of the ones and I hate to ask these, well, I don't hate to ask, but I know some people get a little upset sometimes. I did an interview with Romero probably about 6 months before he died. And I asked him what he wanted to talk about, and he wanted to talk about the things that got away. And I'm curious, we're not dead yet. You still got a lot of life to go, but what are some of the ones that got away that you would have liked to have really have done?
Not that many, all things considered. There was I wrote an episode for one of my first contact points with Harlan was The Outer Limits, and because I wrote a couple of books about it, and
James is going to ask you about it in a minute.
Yeah. And so when the revival series came around in 1995, I lobbied very heavily to write for that show, and I regret it to this day. It was like, that was one of the cases where you get to see your script butchered beyond belief, and by committee, and so it was a catastrophe, and you just try to disown it. And virtually nobody brings it up to me anymore. It's more fun if people bring up Masters of Horror or lately Creepshow, Yeah,
I really liked. I actually really enjoyed Creepshow. I just finished watching it. I do a review for a local horror convention called Scarefest, and it's a weekly thing. And I just finished it probably a month or two ago, and I was surprised, even with the low budget, how much I enjoyed it and how well it's done.
Oh my God, those half-hour segments were shot in 3 days.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I literally watched Greg Nicotero shoot 2 shows at the same time. He would run from one end of the soundstage to the other, and he would look at the setups on his phone, and then he would run over to the next set and call action cut, and he'd run back to the first set and call action cut. I mean, I don't know how he did it.
They're
I don't know
really
how he
good.
did it.
I've told these 2 guys they need to get Shudder because Creepshow's pretty good. I've enjoyed it. It's been good. James, question.
I saw, I happened to spy, not to be a voyeur, but I noticed that you do have a little Outer Limits something on your desk, and when we were getting ready for the interview, I wanted to I wanted to look, and I was like, oh, that would be really cool to get the Outer Limits companion, and evidently the original press of that, it's out of print, and people want a lot of money for that.
The last edition, which was done in 1998, is it's 20 years old already, more, and the tragedy of this may be changing very shortly, because we've got proofs for the revised, what we're calling the Ultimate Outer Limits companion. It's been finished since 2017, but we've had some licensing issues, which may actually go away this year, I'm hoping, because it is this huge expansion of the book. And just to drive people who are fans of the show crazy, as expanded as the book is, this is the Via Vision Blu-ray set from Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just to drive everybody crazy, Kino Lorber did the Blu-ray set in 2019. And we did a shit ton of supplements that are all off of my shelves right here, and audio commentaries. Just to piss everybody off, we added more supplements for the Australian set. Just to piss everybody off even more, we talk about stuff on the supplements on the Australian set that aren't in the book.
Maybe you
Because
are Harlan's.
It keeps expanding. It's like, to be a true, we want people to demonstrate that they're true purists. Yes, you have to go all the way and read the book and listen to the commentaries and do all that other stuff. But in the category of lost masterpieces, if you will, there were 2. There were, in the wake of The Crow, I had meetings on you would not believe, I had meetings on every friggin' comic book movie imaginable.
I can imagine, because it was, I'm of that age. We're of that age. And you've talked about it in interviews of, oh my God, no, here comes one who's going to ask me that question and I don't want to talk about it. Yeah. And you get that all the time, but I'm of that age of those people. And I don't know. My wife's seen it, and she just doesn't have the same attachment to it. She goes, "Oh yeah, it's cool." I was like, "No. This is revolutionary at the time."
Well, it had to be there,
right?
Temporally. Yeah. And it was like, I think that makes a lot of difference. It changed a lot of people's lives. And I have to tell you guys, like I've said in other interviews, it's like there's movies that people like, movies that people cherish. And then there's something like this, which is tinged by the disaster of Brandon getting killed while we were shooting.
Right.
And it makes it completely different because it assumes a mythic status as a movie. But most of the people who watch the movie will not go to Brandon's grave in Seattle, where he is buried next to his dad, and see people leave bottles of booze, flowers, greeting cards. The grave is just covered with this stuff. Yeah. And you pick it up and look at it because there's a bench there where you can sit there. Mm-hmm. And you pick up this stuff, from my standpoint, you pick up this card and people have written on the card lines of dialogue that you wrote.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Are on the grave. So, but to get to your earlier point, you can block that stuff up, but eventually you have to learn how to cope with this for the people who are not going to stop asking those questions.
Well, it's so much part of the zeitgeist, and
it's not unfair to ignore their curiosity.
No, but I find a lot of it is shitty journalism. by people
it's
probably
very easy. But I've written shitty journalism in my life, and I know very clearly where the line of abuse is.
right.
And so, unfortunately, it took me all this time to to get there. But in the wake of The Crow, there was a period of time where I was writing these two gigantic movies at the same time, neither of which got made.
What were they?
Which was The Catastrophe. One was for Lightstorm and 20th Century Fox,
Mm-hmm.
and the other was for Interscope. And I can't talk about the Lightstorm one too much, but the Interscope one was a movie version of a series they had on MTV called Dead at 21.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And both of these were enormous projects. I mean, I had to go into a room and sell this thing to Ted Field at Interscope Polygram, in 15 minutes. And which reminds me of the story where I had to sell Michael Bay a movie in 15 minutes, but
we'll get to that in a second.
I did that too. Yeah, I did that too. But unfortunately, it was sad. They were very. You proceed on these projects with the assumption that it's like, wow, we got this is practically a green light. I can't believe it. We're going to be shooting this movie in 6 months, and it's huge. I mean, it's gigantic, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
For one reason or another, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then pretty soon you find yourself changing representation, and it all ends.
How do you cope with that? I'm sorry,
I was
Chad.
going to say, and I was going to say with that, I mean, every project you pick up, do you go into it going, this is going to get made, or is that mentality there of, I know this is never going to see the light of day?
You can't write something. You can't write something conscionably, Chad, if you don't believe it's going to get made.
Okay.
Because you have to every step of the writing is you have to visualize it getting made in your head in order to get it down on paper. And so you go in with the best of intentions, and it's like one of those hope for the best and prepare for the worst, scenarios.
But how do you emotionally deal with that? So we've had some letdowns, and I always say I'm a failed filmmaker. Our short films didn't quite pan out and whatnot, but we've made the best of what we can. However, how do you deal with because you never get to that point in Hollywood. There's very few ever do where, all right, I'm going to make movies till I say I'm done. You never get to say when you're done. They say when you're done.
No, you're done when you fall over on the keyboard and just
right.
And they find your body, but I mean,
and your best project's always the next one.
Well, it goes all the way back to selling something to a newspaper that has no reason to buy something from you, which is that I am unemployable in any other field at this point. So I have to, find ways to make it work or hope people remember what I'm doing and picking it up, which is what happened on, Masters of Horror, what's happened on Creepshow. These all came, from people that I met when I first moved to LA.
Yeah.
So yeah, by and large, a lot of it is people but more of it is people that remember you.
Positively.
For doing one thing or another, yeah.
So Pick Me Up, as James and I, we were talking about this, and Chad as well, but James quotes one of those lines from Pick Me Up all the time. James, you want to do it? We won't do it justice.
Not my victim. I have literally, I'll be honest.
Before we ever did this for years, he says it all the time.
He does all the time.
That was fun to shoot, man.
There's something I loved Masters of Horror, but if you hold a gun to my head, there's 2 or 3 episodes that stand out, and Pick Me Up, because it was always the thing that I heard my parents say, right? Like, right. Truck drivers kill people. There's 1 or 2 bad ones, but you got to assume they're all. And then, and hitchhikers, never pick up a hitchhiker. And then to see that, and I can remember watching it
going like this, yeah.
It was literally, I just wanted to almost call my parents and be like, listen, I've got to show you something. And it's just because you have scarred me so much that now I watch this and be like, they were right.
Mm.
So what makes me nuts is that Larry Cohen shot that, directed that. And I get up to Vancouver and Mick tells me this is the first thing that Larry has directed that he didn't write himself.
Yep.
He picked it. He picked it up.
They talk about that in the King Cohen documentary. Have you seen it?
I'm in it.
I know. Yeah. So, how did that? Can you give us your best Larry Cohen story?
I think I just did. Yep. Yeah, because the great thing about Larry is that if you wanted to experience independent filmmaker maverick school live, that's Larry. It's like he sits there. It's like there's no video village. There are no monitors. He stays 6 feet away from the actors at all times. And he knows exactly which takes he wants from watching him. He never looks at a screen to decide. And we would get the dailies on the set. They would come on disc from the previous day. Larry would hand them to me over his shoulder and he goes, "Go to my trailer and look at these. Tell me if they're any good."
That's a lot of access for a writer, man, on a set, right?
Yeah. I was glad I did it. I did it on both my Masters of Horror, and I think there are reasons for having a writer on the set, and this goes back to The Crow, because they go, "Well, the movie's written. What the hell are you going to do?" Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, but we're rewriting the movie every day.
Yep. And
we're shooting at night, so at lunchtime, which is about 2:00 in the morning, the storyboard artist, a friend of mine, we would go to Alex's trailer at lunchtime and find out what we were going to do for the next 24 hours. I need to change this scene so it's like this. I need this dialogue so it's like this. So what else does a writer do on the set? Well, among other things, come up with every inscription and name in the cemetery, come up with every business name on the main street and all the signage in the windows. The art department was knocking on my door constantly. What does this look like? What does this sound like? What does it say? How does it do? What do the billboards say? It's like that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I was busy. I was on that set for over 100 days straight. And it was like there was always something to do. If Alex didn't want me to do anything, there was something the art department wanted me to do.
It's a great learning experience, though.
Oh, it's unmatched. There's nothing like it. Which is why making movies can be, an enormous amount of fun at the same time. It's just sort of like to get in there and play with those toys, to look at Alex Proyas when he's walking through the 6 blocks of Vancouver that we redressed into a future city, watching him walk through this thing that he imagined and that somebody created for him. There's nothing like that unless somebody goes out of their way to invent something that was in your brain. You can't know. That's why everybody wants to do it so much. It's not to get like pop culture fame or anything like that. It's just like you get to walk through your dream.
I completely agree with you. I don't know that anybody does it for the fame. Well, there's probably some people who are in front of the camera who may do it for the fame, but I don't know anyone that does the behind the camera stuff for the fame. I've never met them.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, yeah. Who knows who in the ordinary world knows who the DP is?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've been friends with DPs. I've been friends with some of those famous DPs in the industry. Conrad Hall.
Uh-huh.
Bill Fraker. Both Outer Limits guys. That's how I met them.
You're just geeky. You're more geeky than we are, which we love about you.
How do you think I got here?
Absolutely. All right. I know we're running a little long. James, you said you had one more question.
I did want to ask this because I think it's interesting because you've seen your work adapted into film.
Sure.
And you've also taken, James O'Barr, for example, his work and adapted it to film. And I read The Crow as a book, and it's a very the graphic novel is very visual. The scene that always sticks with me that I don't know if it could ever be adapted to film is the horse getting tangled in the wire and all of that. What is the response when you adapt something? Do you have any stories about James O'Barr? What was his kind of take on how it got adapted?
James came to the set when we were shooting. And I actually got him on video stealing a TV set from the pawn shop while everybody was like. Why
the fuck was he stealing a TV?
Oh, you can see it in the movie. You see this one shot of him running off, But at the time that we did the movie, the comic wasn't finished.
Oh,
We had 3 issues, and then we had the last 2. The end was a 2-parter that was a set of incomplete pencils that we had, and we were sort of kind of left to our own devices to kind of devise not only an arc for this but an ending for this, because I don't know whether even James was capable of saying at the time how conclusively, it would finish. And so we're just trying to go, what makes sense? Well, now we got Brandon's input. Now we got Alex's input. And writing that movie consumed most of 1992 for me. It started in it started like in September of 91. And then in January 93, we're on the set and we're still writing the damn thing.
Yeah.
So it was like, you got to figure out how to make that. You need people who are experts in contract renewal, because there are so many intermediate drafts that no one is ever going to see. This is another writing thing, by the way, because if you're doing a new draft, technically a new draft every day of production, there is no definitive draft of this movie. And agents asked us for a draft of the movie to show somebody one time, and we had to literally cut and paste one together because we didn't have one.
Yeah,
we didn't have one that represented the movie, that everybody was watching. And so we had to go those blue pages, those pink pages, those yellow pages. We went into colors that are not in the rainbow or the spectrum. They had to invent new colors for our revision pages. It was ridiculous.
That makes sense. We did the same. We do the same thing with the little short films that we did. We rewrote them and rewrote them and rewrote them. You're always trying to get it the best that you can as you go.
Because it's an organic process. If you have to wire every detail down so tight that it can't breathe or can't move, when you get on a set, you're going to discover, oh, fuck, we have to cut 3 pages. What are we going to do? How are we going to cover these 3 scenes outside with 1 scene indoors?
Yep.
Because we got to decide on the fly and in the moment.
Yeah. All right. So I know we're running a little long, and I didn't actually. I made a faux pas by not asking you when you had a heart out. So I'm going to assume that we're at an hour and a half, and that's a long time. But I've got it. There's a couple of people I want to ask you about. I'd love to talk to you about Frank Darabont, but what I'm going to ask you is your best Michael Bay story, because we've had a few good ones on here.
Oh yeah.
One of them was it William Sandell? He was the production designer on the Flintstones. Did he tell us that story after we cut the camera? I think he did.
I think he did.
Yeah. So what's your best Michael Bay story?
I have a good Michael Bay story. It's like when they wanted a new writer. Platinum Dunes wanted a new writer on Texas Chainsaw: The Beginning. And a friend of mine who had vanished from my life for the better part of a decade because he was off selling Lord of the Rings to the world for a new line, came back to town. And literally 8 years later, I get a phone call from him. And he goes, okay, so where were we? And he says, no, I have some things for you. And I went to his office, and he pulls this script off the top of a bunch of scripts. You know how they write on the spine of the script in marker, and the marker misses most of the pages which you can still tell what the title is. It's like they pull it off, and it says Chainsaw, and I went, oh, no. No, stick with me. They're making this. It's a done thing. And all we got to do is convince them that you're the right guy to write this for this process. So, okay, fine. But we got to pitch it to Michael. And it's like, Michael Bay is currently busy filming The Island at a defrocked aircraft manufacturing plant in Downey. So we walk into the aircraft plant. Michael Bay has built a 500,000 square foot set with working elevators. We walk in on the outside. 5 minutes later, we're walking. We still haven't gotten to the center of the set, And it says, okay, Michael's shooting, but he just wants to make sure you're okay for this. You tell him the story. And so there's this bank of monitors, this video village, and Michael's like, action. Okay, cuts. Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson. It's like, okay, cut. And then Michael and I run off into a corner and we do this for 5 minutes. We're talking to each other, and then he's nodding and he's doing the same thing. Then he runs back to the monitors and he goes, action, cut. And then we run back into the corner for 5 more minutes and we're waving our arms like crazy. And it's like, bam, you're hired. So I've been on sets before. I know how to be on sets. I know how not to trip over cables. I know how to not knock light stands over, you know, and stuff. And so I have a certain degree of pride in my ability to be invisible on a set. And I'm standing there watching Michael direct the scene. We're done talking. We're going to leave. I just want to hang out for a little while and watch. It's a big budget motion picture, you know, kind of thing. And an AD walks over to him and he goes, don't stand here if you can avoid it. And I thought, what's wrong? What's wrong? Am I in the wrong place? And he goes, no. He goes, it's not that. He goes, when Michael gets mad, this is where he throws the monitor.
Wow.
But that all said, you know, Michael was nothing but decent to me. He got me a great job, you know, 6 months of work that I really didn't get a lot of credit for, but I was paid well for, you know.
Yeah.
At that time, and what happens at that time? You have to write that movie as though you're convinced they're going to make it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we'll tell you our Michael Bay story maybe later. It's also about anger issues.
We can do it. Yeah, we can do it when we're not eating up your episode time. You know?
Right. So, my one thing is there this is kind of a two-parter. Is there a book? Is there an idea that you just got to do before you leave this plane of existence? And why have you never directed?
Mick asked me about directing too, and I never really felt the drive to direct. I mean, I've seen it drive people crazy.
Yeah.
And it seems to me you have to be answerable. Could I do it? Possibly. I know enough about it from observation that I could probably fake it really well. Or if the production was small enough. It's not to say no. There was an opportunity that came up about 15 years ago for shooting something in Australia that a producer wanted to hire me to do, and it never came to pass. And I thought that was the opportunity, and it sailed past at that time. I've never actively pursued it. I've never asked to direct anything like that. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. And what was the second part?
I want to know that dream project, whether that's that book you want to write, whether that's a book you want to adapt for film, whether there's just this idea in your head that won't let go, that's something you've got to get on the screen.
I have to, in response to that, I have to talk about Storm King again, because Storm King has allowed me to express in long graphic novel narrative form a lot of the very ideas that you're talking about. If somebody decides to adapt a novel of mine or something, I would certainly like a crack at it, but it's not completely necessary, because two of my friends are the Nelms brothers, who just did Fat Man, and they did a spectacularly good modern noir called Small Town Crime. And they were hot to do a book of mine, but they wanted to write the script themselves. And I said, because from everything that I can see, the way you guys put movies together, you guys know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm not worried about it. If you want me to have a chance to have some input, that's great. But if you want to take it and run with it, take it and run with it, because I have enough other projects out there that I'm not going to saw the violin about losing that one. And my name is still on it. It's my source material. I invented those characters in those situations. So they showed me a script that they had done. I went, wow, this is pretty good. It's full of things that I hadn't ever thought of, but it's pretty good. So I'm actually, to short answer to the question, I'm actually getting the chance to do those now. I mean, the last novel that I did with Subterranean Press publishing it was called The Big Crush, and that was kind of like my ultimate assassin novel that I always wanted to write.
Mm-hmm.
And it started out just thinking about, I want to write a book that has nothing but professional assassins as characters. and it came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. Now the thing is, you got to get people to notice it.
Yeah.
So that leads me to, where can they get all your work? So let's say they're listening right now and they're like, I have got to get the next novel. Where can they get all that?
Well, there isn't a next novel until I do my next Hard Case Crime paperback, which has been delayed for about 5 years as I screw around doing other stuff.
Right.
It's all on Amazon, but I have to point out the Cimarron Street reprints of my backlist, which we started doing last June. We've been doing a book a month, Me of the Month Club. But these are brand. You had Wild Hares, right?
Yep.
The only difference between the old version of Wild Hares and the new version of Wild Hares,
right here, Wild Hares. He signed it for me in 2009.
Is that the new version of Wild Hares has a red thing on the bottom of it?
That's the only difference.
Yes, because it was our experimental reprint to see if the system could work, to see if we could use Amazon as a printer, and it's worked out very well. Because our mission, if you only do one book, nobody's going to see it. But if you do a book a month, and we've now done 7 now because one just dropped yesterday. Pretty soon, our objective is to get a foothold on the algorithm.
Yeah.
So that when you get this version of Wild Hares, for example, it now leads you to the other books that we did. And the other books that we did are remixed versions of my collections. I wanted to add stuff to them. I wanted to add long, explanatory, semi-autobiographical afterwords, just like Harlan would have. And we had an opportunity to actually illustrate the title pages of a lot of these things. So these are like definitive preferred text editions. And we've got them all lined up for the rest of this year. And we're already seeing them on Amazon. One copy will refer to another copy. And so John, who runs Cimarron Street, now you can go to the cimarronstreet.com.
Okay.
And which is also the enterprise that does Bare Bones Magazine. And Bare Bones Magazine is the place where you will find the new Raving and Drooling. We're now in our 5th installment. And so John says, why don't we do a sampler of everything that we're doing? And I said, why don't we do a sampler? It's cheaper than any book in the series. And why don't we do a sampler as the lost issue of an imaginary pulp magazine that never existed?
I love that.
Called Weird Doom. Okay. And here, this is it, except for the band that indicates that it's approved. But this dropped yesterday, and this is Weird Doom with a Bernie Wrightson painting as a cover. By the way,
wow, Bernie Wrightson.
We love Bernie.
It cost 999 cents. And it's like 8 Strange Tales of Weird Doom, and it's a sampler of everything we're doing for Cimarron Street to give you a taste of what we're up to. It's got one of the columns, it's got an afterword, it's got several stories, and it's full of art by my friend Hal Robbins, who did us a terrific logo in the spirit of Weird Tales.
Yeah.
And it'll cost you, $10.
Sold.
I'll order it tonight or tomorrow.
I was going to say, as soon as I'm done here, I know where I'm going. That is great.
But if you do, will you guys let me know what you think of it?
Of course. If you want to know, absolutely.
Great, excellent.
One of our great privileges was meeting Bernie beforehand, and I have a original Creep Show over here that on my wall, one sheet that I just think the world of. Bernie Wrightson was his Frankenstein. We could talk about Bernie for another hour.
Listen, I moved Bernie in and out of every apartment he had in L.A., okay? I looked his boxes of shit, so I know. But you see this?
Yeah.
Joe? You see the painting? It's actually a wraparound painting.
Oh, yeah.
See?
Oh, yeah.
Love Bernie's work. So we can go to Amazon or Cimarron?
Yeah. Go to Cimarron first and then go to Amazon.
Got it. Go to Cimarron.
Oh, that is
beautiful.
epic.
All right, David. The next time we're in LA, we're crashing at your pad.
Yep. We got a guest room.
All right.
That is
I just got my
You
second
can see, and if you do, you can see all the other original Bernies I got on the wall in the living room.
And while I'm making a sandwich at midnight, holding the glove in my hand, Joe did it.
All right, man. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. We've had a great time. Hopefully, you've enjoyed it as well.
We'll do more in the future.
That's awesome.
Oh, please.
Go to Amazon, look up David Schow. Check out his work. Check out CimarronPress.com.
Cimarron Street Books.
Cimarron Street Books.
Cimarron Street is an I Am Legend reference, if you don't know it.
I told you, I Am Legend and Hell House, man.
Okay.
My 2 favorite Matheson books. All right, this has been Bonehead Weekly.